My Best Friends Live in the Woods. The Adventures of Albert by Anne Michelle Moracek. Chapter 25. The Princess.
Ooh, I assure you, your majesty, I had no idea.
Owl paced back and forth nervously. No one had been more shocked to see Jillian take off her robes of office, and now he was answering to the Great Stag.
Can she even do that?
Owl puffed.
Should I summons her?
His feathers were ruffled.
I expected more from one of Mother Skunk's children. Ooh,
he said with a frown. Now, it's not the end of the forest, the prince chuckled. No one is in trouble. The Great Stag's tone was reassuring, and Owl calmed down. I gave her free choice, so yes, she can do that, he assured Owl. And the more I think about it, that is exactly the selfless, true-to-your-promise act I should have expected from Mother Skunk's family, though I admit I am disappointed. She was a wonderful priestess, and I miss her singing. The prince was deep in thought. I think I'll go for a walk, the prince said as he stepped out of the great glen.
Ooh, as you wish,
Owl said and started to walk along beside the stag. Alone this time. The prince nodded for Owl to return to the great glen. Wait for me, will you? He said as he strode off.
As you wish,
Owl hooted. Mother Deer was curled up in the cedar thicket to sleep that night. She was alone. Anthena and Jillian were not going to be separated, and Jillian was excited to be back in her own home in the great moss bed. Mother Deer had happily allowed Anthena to spend the night in the cave with Jillian. Alone, her thoughts kept replaying the events of the evening and the shock everyone had felt when Jillian took off her lavender robe. She was deep in thought when she heard a twig break. She was suddenly at full alert. Who could be walking near the thicket at this hour? She turned her ears, straining to hear. Then she saw the majestic antlers of the Great Stag as he walked straight toward her. She smiled her broadest smile. The two touched noses. Dearest. The Great Stag nuzzled her neck. My heart, she cooed back. As he settled into the cedar thicket next to her, he felt the weight of his office slide away. I wish you would come and live in the great glen as my queen, he smiled at her. They had discussed this so many times before. It's not right for us to be apart, he said firmly. You know it's for Anthena. I want her to have a normal childhood, not to be bowed to and catered to as the princess, Mother Deer answered, as she always did. He nodded. Were you surprised? He asked. By Jillian? She asked. He nodded. Not really, she said slowly. The girls promised to always be best friends, and I suppose Jillian felt she couldn't do both. The two sat silently in their own thoughts. Maybe she can, he said. Maybe we can finally be a family. His smile slowly broadened across his face. Let's you and I pay a visit to Mother Skunk in the morning. Back at the cave, the party was in full swing. Bluebell had their biggest pot on the stove full of blue corn kernels and oil. Mother Skunk was in her overstuffed chair clapping merrily as the children laughed and danced. You should have seen Owl's face, Timothy laughed. Yeah, it was awesome, Jack added in a loud burst. I missed you so much. Albert hugged Jillian. We all did, they all agreed. A loud knock at the front door and a hearty, hello! turned their heads as Mr. and Mrs. Beaver stuck their heads in. "Can we join the party?" they grinned. "Join us!" they all cheered. "Welcome home, Jillian," Mrs. Beaver said as she handed her a little wrapped bundle. Jillian unwrapped a lovely pile of sweet roasted acorns. "Oh, you shouldn't have," she beamed excitedly. The corn started to pop with a loud pow, and a fluffy kernel shot across the room. They all jumped and laughed. "Catch!" Albert shouted, and the game was on as the kernel shot out of the pot. Bluebell blushed. "I forgot to put the lid on the pot." "Good!" Jillian laughed. "This is so fun!" Charlie was having a ball. "Yoo-hoo!" came a call from the front door. "Come join the fun!" Mother Skunk waved in Mrs. Rabbit as she held out a bundle of purple carrots to Jillian. "Gracious!" Jillian blushed. "I didn't do anything to deserve gifts." "Well, just the same." Mrs. Rabbit twitched her nose and grinned. "Cut it!" Gabby squealed as he snatched a fluffy hot popcorn as it shot from the pot. The knocks on the door kept coming. Mrs. Squirrel arrived with Jimmy and the triplets in tow. Even Mrs. Robin bobbed in. "I could hear you noise monsters all the way across the forest," she teased, a twinkle in her eyes. It seemed everyone wanted to share in the joy and merriment of Jillian's return. Molly and Clara suddenly bounded in the door. "Are we too late for the party?" they laughed. Molly had been spending the night at Clara's, and they had raced back to the cave when they heard Jillian was home. Molly trotted right up to Jillian and gave her her biggest hug ever. "Tomorrow I will make you the prettiest daisy chain crown in the world." She smiled and patted her head. Bluebell started to refill the popcorn pot. "Lid off! Lid off!" Albert started the chant, and everyone else merrily joined in. "Oh, well, as you wish," Bluebell said, pretending to be annoyed, and then laughed a big belly laugh. The joy was so thick you could spread it on toast. Then a loud knock at the door turned all heads. A striped, long, pointy nose poked in, and everyone went silent with a gasp. Then a paw stuck in around the corner, holding out a large bouquet of calendula flowers. Shyly, Mrs. Badger peeked in and grinned cautiously. "So glad you are home, dear," she said to Jillian. "You showed me so much kindness." Mrs. Badger just stood there not knowing what to do. Everyone was silent. Then Mother Skunk called out, "So wonderful of you to come! Please come in and sit by me." Instantly, Mrs. Badger's expression flashed into the happiest of smiles. "Oh, thank you so much! So lovely to be included!" And she trotted in merrily, handing Jillian the flowers, and sat with a contented plop on the cave floor next to Mother Skunk's chair. Pow! The second batch of blue corn began to pop and to shoot out of the pot. It landed square in Mrs. Badger's lap. Everyone sat in silence. Mrs. Badger popped it into her mouth and exclaimed, "How delicious!" Everyone laughed, and the party was once again in full swing. They danced and sang, hooking elbows and dancing in circles around one another, then changing partners till everyone had gone around with everyone. Jillian sat on the floor, and the sound of the dancing and the merriment began to seem muffled and distant. Mother Skunk looked over to see Anthena and Jillian curled up, heads nodding. She stood up on her chair and waved her hands to get everyone's attention, putting her finger to her lips in the hush quiet signal as she pointed to the two friends falling asleep. Everyone quieted and conversations went to whispers. "Good night, good night." They grinned and waved as one by one the friends made their way to the door. Mother Skunk and Bluebell gently roused Jillian and Thina, just enough to lead them into the great moss bed. "Sweet dreams," Mother Skunk kissed Jillian's forehead. Albert stayed up just long enough to sweep up popcorn that had been left on the floor. "Thank you, dear." Mother Skunk smiled a very tired, contented smile at Albert as she settled back into her chair to sleep. As the light crept into the room, Jillian slowly began to blink and open her eyes. At first, she was confused and didn't know where she was. Glancing about, she saw Aunt Thina curled up next to her and the familiar tangled pile of snuggled skunk siblings on the great moss bed. After a moment of blank confusion, a lovely, contented smile rolled over her face as her mind cleared and her memory of last night returned. "I'm home," she thought. "Really home. How lovely." But as she lay there in thought, waiting for the others to wake, she began to worry. Perhaps there would be some real punishment for her actions. No one had ever taken off the robes of a priestess before. Would she bring shame on her family? Would she be shunned? Why buy trouble, she thought. No, for now I should be happy to be home. She had become accustomed to waking early. The Great Stag had loved her to sing to the sun as it rose, to wake him for the new day. It was hard at first to get up early, but as the days passed, she grew to love greeting the sun's rays as the magic of its warmth shot pink across the eastern sky. She was surprised at herself. When she was in the Great Glen, all she wanted to do was go back to Mother Skunk and her home in the cave. But seeing the sun streaming in, she realized she had missed singing the sunrise and felt a pang of regret at having missed it. She didn't have any more time to ponder as the rest of the children began to wiggle awake. Charlie scampered over to Jillian and placed a big wet kiss on her forehead. "Let's play," he said, and bounded up and down on the bed. "Breakfast," Bluebell called in. "Oh boy, and I'm hungry," chattered the noisy group as they poured into the kitchen. Mother Skunk was proudly holding a huge platter of gingerbread cookies, grinning ear to ear. "Bluebell and I got up early to bake," she declared, pleased as punch. "Welcome home, Jillian," she and Bluebell said together. And so the party continued. As Bluebell and Albert filled mugs with spring water and began passing cookies, a firm knock came at the front door. "Now who could this be?" Mother Skunk grinned as she trotted over and pulled it open, expecting to see Mrs. Rabbit or Mrs. Beaver. She jumped back in shock. There stood the Great Stag, Prince of the Forest. She covered her mouth to stifle a gasp, and everyone froze. "Good morning," he said in a kind voice, and looking over to Jillian, he smiled. "Priestess?" He nodded to her. Jillian didn't know what to say. Hadn't she taken off her robes? Was he going to refuse her resignation and call her back to her duties? Her head was spinning. "Allow me to introduce my queen," he said, grinning ear to ear. As he stepped aside, a shy mother deer stepped around from behind him. "Good morning, Mother Skunk," she said quietly. "I'm so confused," Mother Skunk said, and sat down with a plop. Aunt Thina sat blinking, not knowing what to think. "Mama?" was all she could manage. "Aunt Thina, you are a princess, my darling," Mother Deer smiled. Aunt Thina looked at Jillian for answers, but she was just as confused. Mother Skunk looked back and forth between Mother Deer and the Great Stag. and a broad smile began to cross her face.
Can I interest you in a cup of tea and a cookie?
She smiled at Mother Dear. Why, yes, thank you, she smiled back. Anthena, you are my daughter, the Great Stag smiled. And Jillian, you will be richly rewarded for your love and loyalty to the princess. You may keep your titles as priestess and come and go as you like. You may sing ceremonies, and you may come home at night to Mother Skunk, or you may stay with Anthena and her mother and I at the Great Glen. It's time for Anthena to learn her place as princess, and for us to be a family.
Let's have tea,
Mother Skunk smiled.
Chapter 25, The Princess, Discussion and Questions. Blame, Inclusion, and Truth. Owl was worried he would somehow be held responsible for Jillian's actions. Sometimes we worry and fret when we should stand firm. Refuse blame for things that are out of your control. Question 1. Is there a situation for which you are being blamed when you are truly not responsible? Question 2. How can you stand firm and be your own advocate? The family and friends all joined in celebration of Jillian's return. Joy is amplified when shared and connects us to our tribe. Question 3. What celebrations have you shared? Question 4. Does the inclusion of family and friends make the event more important and memorable? Mrs. Badger was an outsider to the group, yet she made a sincere and brave effort to be included. Question 5. Is there someone who deserves your kindness and inclusion to your group of friends? By revealing the truth, the Great Stag solves his own family conflicts and offers a creative compromise for Jillian. Question 6. Are there truths that could, once revealed, improve your current situation?
I am the composer and performer for all the music in this video. Both audio recordings and the printed scores are available on mybestfriendsliveinthe.woods.com. I will provide the link below. The painted illustrations are also my creation. Prints are available on mybestfriendsliveinthe.woods.com. This is a novel. The chapters are meant to be heard in the order in which they were written. And while each chapter can stand alone, they do build as new characters are introduced and past events are referred to. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. The chapters are numbered, so if you're just joining us, be sure to go back and watch from Chapter 1.
in a dream, in a trance. My spirit flies to the peak horizon of the forest, where fairies say, come and play, and the animals say, there's a better way, an enchanted land of love. My best friends live in the